Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I want to talk to you about the new 5th Azerite ring in 8.1 and the specific Azerite pieces that drop in the Battle of Dazal'alor raid. Now, in case you don't know, there are actually 9 bosses in the new raid Battle of Dazal'alor, and the cool thing about it is that each and every boss actually drops an Azerite piece, which means you have 3 chances of getting an Azerite chest, 3 chances of getting a pair of Azerite shoulders, and 3 chances of getting an Azerite helm. So let's take a closer look at each individual piece and see which ones are better for certain specs and different encounters. Now, what I really want to highlight in this video is actually what pieces have a really good combination in their first row here, which is technically the new 5th row, as well as the old 4th row here. And with having good combinations in those specific pieces, I want to talk more about which pieces I feel are going to be really strong, either in Mythic Plus or in raid scenarios, mostly single target based scenarios. With that being said, taking a look at the first boss, which is named Champion of the Light, the first Azerite piece we have access to as a Warlock is called the Divine Fury Raiment. Now, as Affliction, we have access to 2 traits here in the first row called Dreadful Calling or Racking Brilliance. The Demonology specific traits are either Baleful Invocation or Shadow's Bite, and Destruction has Chaotic Inferno and Chaos Shards. Now, taking a look at the other options we have available to us in the level 30 row, we have Cascading Calamity for Affliction, Explosive Potential for Demonology, and Flashpoint for Destruction. The good thing here is that we can combine both Racking Brilliance and Cascading Calamity on this piece, making it a strong single target Affliction piece. Unfortunately, Explosive Potential is our only Demonology choice in the level 30 row, so regardless combining it with Baleful Invocation or Shadow's Bite, it's still not really going to be a piece that you want for Demonology if you can avoid it. As far as Destruction goes, we do have Flashpoint in the level 30 row, which makes this a decent viable option for Mythic Plus. Flashpoint does lose a good bit of value on raid encounters if there's not a target that stays above 80% health most of the fight, and on most fights you really don't see anything like that. So for this piece, it's certainly going to be a strong single target Affliction based piece with Racking Brilliance and Cascading Calamity, a pretty poor Demonology choice, and a mediocre to okay Mythic Plus piece for Destruction, mainly due to the fact that it has Flashpoint on it. The second boss in Battle of Dazal'alor is Grong the Jungle Lord. He drops an Azerite pair of shoulders for us. So the main thing we want to look at here in the first row, we had the option, once again, of Racking Brilliance or Dreadful Calling for Affliction, Shadow's Bite and Baleful Invocation for Demonology, and the options of Chaos Shards or Chaotic Inferno for Destruction. Taking a look at the level 31 row, which is the second row here technically now, it's different from the first piece we saw because it actually requires level 31 instead of 30 to access. The options we have are Bonded Souls, which is a passive, and it says your spells and abilities have a chance to trigger a soul bond for 15 seconds. During soul bond, every 5 seconds, you and your nearest ally are both healed for roughly 7,500 and gain 705 haste for 5 seconds. The Demonology specific trait we have is Supreme Commander, which is very strong in Mythic Plus and raid scenarios. Crashing Chaos is the Destruction specific trait, which is very strong in single target raid scenarios, and Mythic Plus a decent bit of a time when you actually use your Infernal. And the Affliction specific trait we have is Pandemic Invocation. Now, taking a look at the actual Azerite trait combinations we have in this piece, it's going to stick out as a piece that's really strong pretty much across every single Warlock spec. Racking Brilliance and Pandemic Invocation are pretty strong traits for Affliction, and it's going to give you a lot of value on single target encounters where you can refresh your dots within their pandemic window. It's also worth keeping in mind that Racking Brilliance is strong in Mythic Plus, and it's still yet to be seen sort of if Pandemic Invocation is going to potentially be as good as it could be in Mythic Plus. A lot of it's going to come down to if you can actually manage refreshing your corruptions via Seated Corruption, also maintaining your Agony all within their pandemic window. For Demonology, we either have Baleful Invocation or Shadow's Bite in the first row, and our Demonology specific choice in the level 31 row is Supreme Commander. Obviously, running Baleful Invocation and Supreme Commander really shifts a lot of your power to your 1 minute and 30 second Demonic Tyrant cooldown, but this is a really strong combination both for Mythic Plus and raid encounters. There's also the fact that Shadow's Bite is a strong single target choice in general for Demonology, but I'm not really sure where it's going to stack up against Baleful Invocation, maybe stacking 2 or 3 Baleful Invocations in general with Demonic Consumption. But I know that having at least 1 Baleful Invocation trait is certainly going to be something you want as a Demonology Warlock. And looking at the actual Destruction combinations here, we have Crashing Chaos, which is pretty much obviously the strongest Destruction-specific trait, and Chaos Shards or Chaotic Inferno. This is more so going to be a piece for Destruction that I look towards on raid encounters. I'd like to see some kind of Flashpoint or Rolling Havoc combination on most of my Mythic Plus pieces as Destruction, but either way, this is going to be a really strong piece for all 3 specs heading into 8.1. Now taking a look at Jade Fire Masters, which is the third boss in BFD, the Azerite piece they drop is an Azerite helm called the Blazewing Hood. We can take a look here and we see that the traits we actually have are Racking Brilliance again, or Cascading Calamity for Affliction, Shadow's Bite or Explosive Potential for Demonology, and Chaos Shards or Flashpoint for Destruction. In the level 29 row we have Treacherous Covenant, which once again is the passive that increases your main stat by a certain amount while you're above 50% health. We also have the options of Sudden Onset for Affliction, Demonic Meteor for Demonology, and Rolling Havoc for Destruction. Now looking at these combinations here, there's two specs that really stick out to me as being more powerful or wanting this piece than the third. Obviously having both Racking Brilliance and Cascading Calamity on the first row for Affliction is strong in a sense. The thing is they're both strong single target traits. Taking into account that Sudden Onset is the trait on the second row here, this piece I'm more so focusing on running in Mythic Plus as Affliction, running the triple SO rather than Agony build. Racking Brilliance is strong across basically every scenario as Affliction, and having a Sudden Onset piece, obviously all three pieces are in Battle for Dazal'alor, a bit of a spoiler ahead, that have Sudden Onset on them, so it's pretty easy to acquire the actual triple Sudden Onset set in BFD, but this is one of the stronger ones running Racking Brilliance and Sudden Onset. So this is certainly a piece I'm going to focus on wanting a bit more for Mythic Plus than raiding, depending on the fight. If it's a single target based encounter, I'm going to want something like Cascading Calamity, in addition to Racking Brilliance. But obviously, if it's a multi-target based encounter like Conclave of the Chosen, this combination of Racking Brilliance and SO will be a very strong piece to have. Looking at the Demonology specific traits, we have Shadow's Bite and Explosive Potential in the first row, and unfortunately we have Demonic Meteor in the second row. Now, the unfortunate thing here is that Explosive Potential doesn't have any potential. It's not a good trait. So we really don't want it in any scenario. And the other unfortunate part here is that Shadow's Bite is pretty much just a single target trait. It's not strong really at all in Mythic Plus, barring trying to pump single target damage into a priority ad, which is not really what you want to be doing in Mythic Plus most of the time. And really, the main issue here is that in the second row, we have Demonic Meteor, which is a good choice for Demonology and Mythic Plus, but having Shadow's Bite being mostly a single target trait and having Demonic Meteor being mostly a trait that you want in Mythic Plus, and they both being on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, one being good in one scenario, one being good in another, and both being bad in the opposite, it's not really a piece I'm going to want as Demonology, unfortunately. Looking at the actual destruction combination, no, we have Flashpoint or Chaos Shards in the first row and Rolling Havoc in the second row. This is actually a pretty good combination for Mythic Plus. I'm not totally certain how Chaos Shard is going to play out with its buff to Incinerate's damage, and running 2 or 3 actual Chaos Shard traits might push Fire and Brimstone a bit up a bit more, but if Cataclysm stays in its current state, I really expect this piece mainly to be a Flashpoint Rolling Havoc piece. Obviously, like I mentioned before, you can open on a pack, basically dropping Havoc, Flashpoint, and proccing Flashpoint for almost the entire duration of the pack, and having Rolling Havoc active for most of that duration gives you a very large stacking intellect buff. So this is going to be a strong destruction piece, a strong affliction piece, more so on the Mythic Plus end of the spectrum for both specs, and unfortunately not really a piece I want to be focusing on when I'm playing Demonology. Now taking a look at the fourth boss in Battle for Dazal'alor, we have Opulence. This is actually the only piece that I've seen so far also that has a on-use ability on an Azerite piece. Use part of the gem from the crown. It's pretty suiting because the fight is all about gold and managing your actual gem buffs and debuffs. You'll probably know more once you actually get into the raid. This is a pretty cool on-use effect. I have no clue what kind of gem it pulls, if it's just a green gem or has the option of being like a rare gem, but it's pretty cool either way. Anyways, getting into the traits. So the traits on Crown of the Seducer we see here. For Affliction, we have Inevitable Demise, which I should also mention has been shifted away from having from generating stacks. From Corruption to Agony. It only generates stacks off of Agony now, and it maxes out at 50 stacks and not 100. So that's something really important, something to keep in mind moving forward. And the other Affliction-specific trait we have is Pandemic Invocation. For Demonology, we have Umbral Blaze or Supreme Commander. And for Destruction, we actually have Bursting Flare or Crashing Chaos. Looking at the level 29 row, we have a new, a trait we haven't seen at least yet, a new passive, Seductive Power. Your spells and abilities have a chance to conjure Bwonsamdi's Spectral Visage, beckoning him closer to you. If you approach him, you gain 57 to all stats for 5 minutes, stacking up to 5 times. If you fail to heed his call, you lose 1 stack. I'm not really sure what it means if you fail to heed his call. I don't know if it kills you. I imagine you probably just end up losing, a stack if you don't get close enough to him at a certain point. I doubt it kills you the more I think about it because it says you lose 1 stack. It doesn't say you die. So anyways, Looking at the traits in the second row here, outside of seductive power, we have Dreadful Calling for Affliction, Baleful Invocation for Demonology, and Chaotic Inferno for Destruction. So right off the bat here, these traits are not bad for Affliction in the first row, but they're not the best. Inevitable Demise is going to gain a lot of potential, or a lot of value I should say, on fights where you can keep Agony rolling on 2, 3, 4 targets, but you have to keep in mind, obviously it generates stacks from Agony now, and we don't have, permanent Agony, like we have permanent Corruption. So maintaining your stacks is going to be really important, obviously for damage, as well as, just maxing out in your actual ID stacks. The fact that it stops at 50 now instead of 100 stacks also means you have to manage your drains a bit better, a bit more frequently, and a bit more consistently. Pandemic Invocation, like I said, has some value potentially in Mythic Plus, although I haven't really tested with it at all. And I think it does have some value single target wise, but I'm just not sure where it stacks up compared to like IDE, Cascading Calamity, or Racking Brilliance. The unfortunate part here is looking at the actual level 29 row, we have Dreadful Calling, which is absolutely dreadful. The trait unfortunately was nerfed early in beta from reducing your Dark Blast cooldown reducing it to 1 second from 3 seconds, and it hasn't really been touched since then. The only changes it's really gotten has been slight buffs to its damage, which really hasn't changed the trait from being dreadful at all. Looking at the other combinations here, for Demonology we have either Umbral Blaze for Supreme Commander in conjunction with Baleful Invocation. Pretty much most of the time you're going to be running Supreme Commander and Baleful Invocation in that combination, and that is a really strong combination, like I mentioned a bit ago, for both single target raid encounters or stat cleave raid encounters, and also really strong for Mythic Plus. Baleful Invocation does lose a bit of value when you stack, 2 and 3 traits of it, because obviously you're not going to generate more than 5 shards. Even if you did for some reason, it's not actually possible, but it wouldn't actually gain you anything. The only real thing you actually gain from stacking Baleful Invocation is additional damage to your Demonic Tyrant's Demonifier. Now, if you actually run Demonic Consumption, or that ends up being the go-to talent for Demonology, then running 2 or 3 actual traits of Baleful Invocation could become more important, but for now, we have a little ways until actually, 8.1 and these traits are live. Now looking at the level 29 row for Destruction, we have Chaotic Inferno. Realistically, you're pretty much only going to probably be running Chaotic Inferno with Crashing Chaos, which means this is mostly going to be a Destruction-specific piece that I focus on for raid encounters. It doesn't have actual Rolling Havoc or Flashpoint on it, which is really strong in Mythic Plus, so more so this is probably going to be slotted into my actual Destruction raid single target encounter set. Now taking a look at the 5th boss in BFD, which is Conclave of the Chosen, the actual Azerite piece we have available to us here is Mantle of the Sky Terror, which is an Azerite pair of shoulders. Looking at the actual traits here for Affliction, we can see our options are either between Inevitable Demise or Sudden Onset. Now before I go on here, I should actually say that this is the only pair of Azerite shoulders in the raid that has Sudden Onset on them. So if you're looking to try and run the triple SO rather than Agony build in Mythic Plus, this is a pair of shoulders you're going to want to try and acquire, even though the second row Affliction-specific trait is pretty poor. Looking at the 2 Demonology-specific traits here, we have Umbral Blaze and Demonic Meteor, and Destruction has Bursting Flare and Rolling Havoc. In the second row, we have the options of either Seductive Power, which is the passive generic trait we have throughout the raid, Dreadful Calling, Baleful Invocation, and Chaotic Inferno. Looking at Affliction combination specifically here, Dreadful Calling, once again, like I said a few minutes ago, is dreadful. So any piece that has only Dreadful Calling in the second row is not going to be very strong for Affliction currently, unless they buff its duration reduction probably to 2 seconds or drastically increase the damage it does. With that being said, like I mentioned, this is the only SO piece in the raid, so if you're really looking for that high-end shoulder SO piece from Mythic Plus, hopefully you can get lucky with your Mythic Plus cash or randomly rolling the new pieces of gear we get. Otherwise, this is probably going to be the piece that you're stuck with. Looking at Demonology combinations here, we have either Umbral Blaze or Demonic Meteor, and Baleful Invocation. As I mentioned before, Baleful Invocation is going to be really strong in Mythic Plus, obviously for how many shards it generates when you use your Demonic Tyrant, and Demonic Meteor actually is a trait that I like in Mythic Plus a good bit. It provides a really big boost to your actual Hand of Gul'dan splash damage, as well as giving you a small chance to generate a shard back, which can lead to some pretty long actual chains of Hand of Gul'dan. I believe my actual record for total pets out is 23, I believe, on the final boss of Waycrest Manor, and a lot of that was due to Demonic Meteor procs. And looking at the actual Destruction combination here, we have Chaotic Inferno, which is okay. It's an okay single target trait. We have Bursting Flare and Rolling Havoc in the first row here, so if you're looking for like a second or third Rolling Havoc piece, this is a fine piece. Chaotic Inferno's middle of the pack-ish. I'd really rather see obviously like Flashpoint and Rolling Havoc in 2 different rows here. but it's an option. Not the best, not the worst. Strong Demonology piece, mediocre-ish Destruction piece, and probably not the best Affliction piece unless you're looking for your third SO piece to complete your 3 out of 3 SO set for Mythic Plus. Now taking a look at the 6th boss of the raid, which is King Rastakhan, Vestments of the Afterlife is the Azerite-specific chest piece that drops for us cloth wearers. Pandemic Invocation and Sudden Onset are the 2 Affliction-specific traits we have in the first row, and unlike the trait I mentioned, or the actual piece I mentioned a moment ago from Conclave, there actually are 2 chest pieces available in the raid that have Sudden Onset on them. Taking a look at the traits for Demonology here, we have either Supreme Commander or Demonic Meteor, and for Destruction we have actually Crashing Chaos or Rolling Havoc for in the first row. Looking at the traits in the second row here, we have Bonded Souls, Inevitable Demise for Affliction, Umbral Blaze for Demonology, and Bursting Flare for Destruction. Now taking a look at the actual combinations we have available to us, for Affliction we have obviously Inevitable Demise going with either Sudden Onset or Pandemic Invocation here. Like I mentioned, this is not the only SO piece in the raid, so you do have an option of getting another piece, which actually drops from Jaina Proudmoore, and I think has a bit of a better actual trait distribution for Mythic Plus and single target raid scenarios if you're stuck using an SO piece there. Either way, having ID and Sudden Onset is not the worst combination. I suppose you could run Pandemic Invocation as well if it ends up being a strong single target trait. However, SO and ID is not the worst for Mythic Plus. ID, like I mentioned a little bit ago, is losing a good bit of value in Mythic Plus due to the fact that it now generates shards off Agony and not Corruption, which means you're going to have to individually apply your Agonies instead of just precasting a seed, popping it, and your stacks should go through the roof. Like I said, also, Pandemic Invocation, I'm not totally sure where it's going to sit sim-wise single target, but if it is a worthwhile trait, having it and Inevitable Demise is going to be a strong single target option. As far as Demonology goes, unfortunately, Umbral Blaze is not really a trait we're actually really after, single target wise, or Mythic Plus. If it actually dealt or had a chance to put a dot on all your targets it hits, it would be much more viable, but unfortunately it's only the target, and it also has only a 15% chance. So it's really not a super worthwhile trait, which is unfortunate because both Supreme Commander and Demonic Meteor are really strong traits on different ends of the spectrum. So if this was like, Baleful Invocation instead of Umbral Blaze in the second row, this would be a really strong piece. However, it's not the best for Demonology in this current form. As far as Destruction goes, it actually is sort of a solid middle ground piece. We have Bursting Flare in the second row, obviously, which is the mandatory choice for Destruction, unless you take Bonded Souls. We have the option of either Rolling Havoc or Crashing Chaos. Now, Bursting Flare is not a bad single target DPS trait. Now, obviously, Crashing Chaos is very strong single target wise, and Rolling Havoc is much more so on the 2 target cleave raid scenario or Mythic Plus end of the spectrum here. So if you're willing to reforge this piece, this could very easily be a strong piece for Mythic Plus, having Bursting Flare in conjunction with Rolling Havoc, or also being a strong single target piece in raids, running Crashing Chaos and Bursting Flare. So I'd say this is a pretty decent piece for Destruction. Okay for Affliction depending on where Pandemic Invocation ends up being, and obviously if you need to fill in your third Sudden Onset piece for Wrath and Agony Mythic Plus, and a relatively poor Demonology piece, even though the first row has 2 decent options just on different ends of the spectrum. Now, the 7th boss in the raid is High Tinker Mechatorque. He drops the Giga Charged shoulder pads, which are a cloth pair of Azerite shoulder pads. Looking at the actual trait combinations we have here, in the first row we have either Pandemic Invocation or Cascading Calamity for Affliction, Supreme Commander or Explosive Potential for Demonology, and Crashing Chaos or Flashpoint for Destruction. Now in the second row here, we obviously have the passive Treacherous Covenant, which is the primary stat increase when you're above half health, yada yada yada, or the options of Racking Brilliance for Affliction, Shadow's Bite for Demonology, and Chaos Shards for Destruction. So looking at actual Affliction here, having Racking Brilliance in your second row as your only Affliction choice is really solid. As I mentioned before, Racking Brilliance is really strong in Mythic Plus and single target, multi-target raid scenarios, and it scales well with multiple targets. It's pretty much the best Affliction-specific Azerite trait. So having that as your only option in the second row, it makes it obviously a pretty decent piece if the first row has good traits in it. Now, the interesting thing about this pair of shoulders, obviously Cascading Calamity is a strong single target piece for Affliction, even though some might not like the playstyle as much. The interesting thing here is that we're still not really sure how Pandemic Invocation is actually going to stack up in Mythic Plus. It will probably it will push you towards running Wrath and Agony builds, obviously because if you're running Absolute Corruption in Mythic Plus, you only have 1 dot to refresh inside the Pandemic window, and obviously we never run Siphon Life in Mythic Plus. So, We really still need to see and gauge how hard it's going to be to maintain your Seed of Corruption or refreshing it within that last 5 seconds, as well as maintaining all of your agonies. But if you can do so and find the right balance, this piece could actually be really strong in Mythic Plus if you're not running the triple SO build. Wrecking Brilliance, like I said, is really strong in general, and PI could also be a strong single target trait depending on its final tuning and how it looks in Sims when 8.1 comes out. As far as Shadow Bite goes, in conjunction with Supreme Commander or Explosive Potential, realistically, if you run this piece for Demonology, unless Explosive Potential is buffed by a large amount, you're pretty much going to be running Shadow's Bite and Supreme Commander. Honestly, Shadow's Bite is not a bad single target DPS trait for Demonology. And obviously, Supreme Commander is one of, if not the strongest traits. I'm not sure where it's going to stack up against Baleful Invocation, but I'm pretty sure that having multiple Supreme Commanders is probably going to be better than having multiple Baleful Invocations, unless there's some kind of demonic consumption build that comes out for Demonology. Either way, it's a strong single target piece for Demonology. It is a strong single target piece for Affliction as well, with Racking and Cascading. Potentially a strong single target piece for Affliction and Mythic Plus, also depending on how Pandemic Invocation shakes out. Now, unfortunately, in the level 31 row, we have Chaos Shards, which I feel is the least impressive of the 3 new traits, being Baleful, Pandemic, and Chaos Shards from the new 8.1 patch. The thing is here, both Flashpoint and Crashing Chaos are strong traits on their own. Flashpoint, like I mentioned, is strong in Mythic Plus. Obviously, there's going to be targets above 80% health a good bit of the time when you open on new packs. And having actual Cataclysm to apply multiple immolates is going to proc Flashpoint pretty quickly. And also having the option of Crashing Chaos for single target raid scenarios makes this a mediocre piece for Destruction. It's not terrible. Obviously, getting any piece with Crashing Chaos on it is going to be worthwhile for Destruction. Alright, now getting to the penultimate boss in Battle of Dazal'alor, we have Stormwall Blockade. Stormwall Blockade drops the Cowl of Tideborn Omens, which is a cloth Azerite helm we have access to as Warlocks. Looking at the first 2 traits here for Affliction, we have Cascading Calamity, or Inevitable Demise. Explosive Potential, Umbral Blades are the Demonology specific ones, and for Destruction we have Flashpoint and Bursting Flare. In the second row here, once again we have access to Racking Brilliance, Shadow's Bite, and Chaos Shards, just like the actual Azerite piece from High Tinker Mechatorg. So as I mentioned before, having Racking Brilliance in the second row is really strong. It's great to see for Affliction because it's, barring having some cheese strategy where you want 2 specific Azerite pieces, Racking Brilliance is great to see as your only option in the second row because it's just so good in Mythic Plus and single target raid scenarios and multiple target raid scenarios almost everywhere. Looking at the 2 options we have in the first row to go with it, Cascading Calamity is a strong single target DPS trait, as well as Inevitable Demise. Obviously, you're going to gain a bit more value from ID on multiple target encounters where you're maintaining 2 or 3 agonies at once. Once again, keep in mind, generate shards off of agony, not corruption, and it maxes out at 50 stacks, not 100. You have to watch it and maintain it more than before. But either way, this is going to be a pretty strong piece, single target-wise, for Affliction. Looking at the options we have for Demonology, obviously Shadow's Bite is our only choice in the 29 row outside of the passive Bonded Souls. We have it either in conjunction with Umbral Blaze or Explosive Potential. Honestly, both those traits really aren't very good in any scenario. You know, it's not Baleful Invocation, it's not Supreme Commander, it's not Demonic Meteor, and honestly, this piece is probably one of the most underwhelming Demonology pieces we have in the raid. Shadow's Bite is good in single target scenarios for Demonology, but if Affliction stays in its current form, you're going to be playing Affliction in the raid anyways. I don't really expect it to, but either way, there's better options we have at Helm instead of having Shadow's Bite in conjunction with either Umbral Blaze or Explosive Potential. I'm looking at Destruction. Once again, we have Chaos Shards, the option or the combination of Chaos Shards and Flashpoint, which once again is one of the combination potentials from High Tinker Mechatorg shoulders. The main difference here is we actually have the option of Bursting Flare instead of Crashing Chaos. So once again, Chaos Shards is not, I don't think it's going to be the best trait in Mythic Plus or single target raid scenarios. It's not going to be bad. I'm not a huge fan of a 2-second shard generation. I think it should be 3 or 4 potentially because you have a pretty decent chance of overcapping with shards at that point if you're running close to the 4.5 shard point, maybe saving shards for a Havoc window or building for a priority burst ad. Either way, not a huge fan of the trait, but Flashpoint does bring a lot of value to Mythic Plus. As I mentioned, opening on Cataclysm, it'll proc pretty quickly, and then obviously, you know, it leads to faster Havoc windows. So it's not the worst, but it's not the best as well. It's probably a little bit better overall than like the Demonology one is, but this is certainly a pretty strong Affliction piece. Maybe a little less than mediocre for Demonology, and probably about the same for Destruction. Alright, the final boss of the 8.1 raid is Lady Jaina Problem 1, with Robes of Biting Cold. And these robes are pretty much, it's probably going to be the number one Azerite piece that you want to acquire in the raid, regardless of whatever Warlock spec you're playing. So looking at the traits in the first row, we had the option of Sudden Onset or Dreadful Calling for Affliction, Demonic Meteor or Baleful Invocation for Demonology, and Rolling Havoc or Chaotic Inferno for Destruction. In the second row, we had the option of the passive Seductive Power, Pandemic Invocation for Aff, Supreme Commander for Demo, or Crashing Chaos for Destruction once again. So looking at Destruction here, Crashing Chaos in conjunction with Rolling Havoc, as I mentioned before, is a pretty strong choice for Mythic Plus. It might not be the actual best because, like I mentioned before, Crashing Chaos is basically only up when you have your Infernal out, but if you're able to time it correctly, either transitioning from trash to a boss or using it on trash packs before a boss, you can get a whole lot of value of running Rolling Havoc in conjunction with Crashing Chaos when you're using your Infernal. It's also not bad on single target encounters if you run Crashing Chaos with Chaotic Inferno, as Chaotic Inferno is not a terrible single target trait. So this is going to be a strong destruction specific piece for both Mythic Plus and raid scenarios. As far as Supreme Commander in conjunction with Baleful Invocation or Demonic Meteor, this is like almost the perfect combination. Demonic Meteor, as I mentioned, is really strong in Mythic Plus because it buffs your Hand of Gul'dan splash damage, as well as gives you a small chance to generate a shard back when you cast Hand of Gul'dan. Having Supreme Commander gives you obviously a huge boost to your demons, as well as a strong trash cooldown on a 1.5 minute cooldown. So it really comes down to obviously running Supreme Commander and either Baleful or Demonic Meteor. And at this point, if you run Baleful with Supreme Commander, it's going to be a stronger single target DPS build for this Azerite piece. If you run Supreme Commander with Demonic Meteor, you're probably focusing more so on Mythic Plus, unless there's like a stat cleave fight in 8.1. Either way, both combinations are really strong in its respective scenarios, and I'm really excited about this piece for Demonology. And finally, we have Pandemic Invocation with either Sudden Onset or Dreadful Calling. Let's be honest here, it's PI and SO. Dreadful Calling, nothing's changed in the past 20 minutes. Dreadful Calling is still dreadful. The interesting part about this chest, as I mentioned, this is the second of two Sudden Onset chest pieces in 8.1 in the raid. The real interesting part here is that we're still not sure, like I said, about how Pandemic Invocation is actually going to play in Mythic Plus. If you're actually able to maintain and refresh your corruptions via Seed of Corruption in that 5-second window, and then transition back to like refreshing your agonies in their pandemic window as well, this trait could be really strong in Mythic Plus, but it's honestly going to be one that you're just going to have to test with a decent while to get a good feel for it. If PI ends up being a really strong trait in 8.1 in Mythic Plus, then having SO in conjunction with PI, this is probably going to be, this has the potential to be a really, really, really strong sought after piece for Affliction in Mythic Plus. If PI ends up being garbage, then, well, I mean, you've got your SO piece here, but you're probably going to want the other SO piece in the raid. Either way, it is important to keep in mind, like I said, that there are two SO chest pieces, so, you know, you have options. But either way, this is probably going to be the most sought after Azerite piece, especially Azerite chest, for pretty much every single Warlock spec in Battle of Dazal'alor. And that's pretty much it, guys. I hope this video was helpful in giving you all a better understanding of the new Azerite traits coming for Warlocks in the 8.1 Battle for Dazal'alor raid. If you guys are interested in acquiring any of the weak auras you've seen here, I'll have a link to my Twitch and Discord in the description where you can find them all. I'm also going to link my notes for this actual video in the description in a paste bin as well, which will highlight every single piece more in depth while listing every single trait for said piece as well if you sort of missed it in the actual video I just went over. If you guys want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, feel free to smash those like, share, and subscribe buttons as your support really helps. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you all in 8.1. Peace.